All right, I'm going to move into the questions that are being posed by the community here. Excuse me. The first is
Oh,
from Sachin. He's saying, while writing, some autobiographical inputs are reflected in the manuscript. How do you handle that part?
oh, hang on. Let me go up to where it's at. So, oh, some autobiography. Okay. Depends on what you're writing. I mean, if you're writing a memoir, it would have a considerable element of autobiography. But I find that even if you're writing something that seems completely apart from yourself, there will be something because you're writing from the location of the self.
Mm.
So it then depends on a scale from asking whether you're being self indulgent and only talking about yourself at the expense of a larger picture, or whether you're informing a larger picture through your particular entry point. But then if you happen to be writing about yourself and your family or your the situation predicament you're in, then it's legitimate to then talk about yourself. But I think it's always, no matter what genre and whatever scale you're writing at, I think it's important to see how your autobiography can connect in some larger way with others, with a bigger picture.
Okay.
Increasingly, because we live in these times where we are all so interrelated. This is the world of the butterfly effect, as I keep thinking.
So the next, I'm going to club a few questions together because I
Sure,
think we're going to be overrun by questions. But I'm going to read these three, and you can talk about them
sure.
sort of together. So Gokul is asking, would love to know more about your writing process and things that you recommend that we should definitely read as aspiring writers. And Kopal is asking, do you take general notes, again relating to the writing process? I find myself drowning in notebooks. So how do you organize that?
Notebooks are the way to go. I mean, I have always, long before there was any notion of doing any actual write. But yeah, even in school, I always had notebooks on the side, nothing at all to do with what was going on in class. It would be something I wrote down. I mean, there's a very nice 19th century term for this kind of thing, the commonplace book, and I think it's very, very useful. And I still have notebooks from from when I was about 10 years old, 9 or 10 years old. So, uh, you know, there can be notes you make, there can be things you take down from books. You might make drawings, diagrams. Uh, each of these is a conceptual tool. It's also an affective expression. Like when I look back to things I was doing in school, I mean, there was a whole period when it's nothing but warplanes. Uh, for someone more committed to pacifism as I now am, I look back and think, oh, great. I was profoundly interested in Lockheed and its productions, for instance, and so on.
Mm,
But that's
mm,
also partly because part of the family background is military. So,
right.
uh, but when I think back, I'm thinking of the detail in which I would craft some of these things. And what remains for me out of that period is just an attentiveness to the machinery of things. For
Mm,
instance, I think notebooks are absolutely essential. They also become a montage of your own sensibility as it evolves. It also reminds you of what you owe other people, especially if there are passages you're taking down from somewhere else. So you know what has nourished you,
mm,
over a long period. For instance, I know that, I would always circle back to Walter Benjamin or Emmanuel Levinas, thinkers who've been crucial, So it's not about gathering a long itinerary of books you've read. It's about things that resonate for you. I think that's really important.
right. And the second question was about I've made a note of the commonplace book. I think that's a lovely phrase, and I'm definitely gonna make that a practice now as well. The next question was about your writing process and recommended reads for aspiring writers.
Oh my goodness. Writing process is simple. I think you simply have to, what was that? Nihil dies sine linea, something like that in Latin. Not a day without a line. But in the days when presumably parchment was terribly expensive, but today you can do more. But I think you really need to set some time apart every day. I mean, I'm not that disciplined as to wake up at 6, brew myself a cup of coffee, and do 3 hours of writing. But at whatever point of the day you do it, I think you need to maintain that deep consciousness of working at whatever you're working on. And this is related to the notebook. I think uh, that should be a practice that you write down. It could be a stray line, it could be a fragment. For my poetry, particularly, I have this practice of maintaining this notebook of stray lines, images, something heard or misheard, sometimes a bandish line that sticks in the head. And then you go on worrying away at it until it takes shape in some other form. It could be a fragment from anything. You might be reading a book on climate change or zoology or something, and something springs out. I think the attentiveness is crucial.
Right. Um, Thank you. Thank you for that. Karan has a question. How should one begin for a first-time budding novelist? I've been a non-fiction reader and writer. I think you already sort of answered that question.
But if you're going to be wanting to write a novel, then you should immerse yourself in the tradition of the novel. But ideally, also across languages. That's for a number of years, that's been my preoccupation. I think one should be able to read in multiple languages. I mean, either you do that because you can anyway, or you have some resource, some linguistic resources, but you have to push yourself to do that.
Mm.
I think that's absolutely. During the pandemic, for instance, Nancy and I just devoted ourselves to reading as much Hindi poetry as we could. So Shamsher Bahadur Singh, Kumar Narayan, what am I saying? Nagarjun, Ashok Vajpayee, a whole range of people. But that was the language that occurred to us to at that point, you know, work with. But it could be
Yeah.
any language that is at hand or that you want to reach out to.
It's interesting that you say that because I think for many of us, we have one principal language, and I'm guessing for this community, maybe it's English. But for like, if I were to talk about myself, I have three other languages which are accessible.
Yeah.
There is Hindi, which I can read in already, but I
Yeah.
don't read fluently. There is Urdu, which I could definitely reach out to because I understand the words for the most part. I
Yeah.
don't know the script. And then I also know a fair smattering of Punjabi, enough to have a
Yeah.
conversation,
Yeah.
but I don't know Gurmukhi. So it's really not even that much work, but if you go from one to four, it really kind of changes how
Absolutely.
we see things, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, it is crucial. Also, there has been for decades there was a discussion about using Nagari for Urdu as another
Mm-hmm.
potential script, and Sheen Kaf Nizam in Jaipur has actually brought out these editions of Mir and of Ghalib, which are in Devanagari.
Devanagari.
So a lot of Urdu is also accessible in Devanagari. It's accessible in Roman. It's yeah. Script
Well,
is not a hurdle.
Tansy has a question for us. Hello,
Aha.
stranger. Uh, I am so happy to hear your wise words, Ranjit ji. Thank you.
Oh God.
Great to learn more about the openness and curiosity to unlikely sources of inspiration. Would love to know which particular unlikely sources are sparking your curation and poetry right now.
They're not very unlikely because I've been preoccupied with these subjects for a long time. But I'm reading Sunil Amrit's books, which are amazing. He's an environmental historian. So there's one called Unruly Waters, and the other is called This Burning Earth. That's These are amazing books. I've heard him speak and I've met him, but reading these things in detail is really an account of how this planet, how we have brought this planet to this particular pass. But
Uh,
it's also the beauty of the language.
the one other thing that I will mention, which you had introduced to me to, was the poetry, the song called Baroe. Um,
Oh yes, my God, yes, indeed.
which is by Sherwin Hajipour, which is gorgeous, heartbreaking and gorgeous at the same
Yeah,
time. He's an Iranian singer-songwriter.
yeah.
I will share the link in the group. But when Ranjit was there, he was telling me about how he taught a class, and during the class to give people a live project to work on. It was a class on translation, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. It was the
Yeah,
University of Chicago project,
yeah,
SALT, South Asian Literature Translation.
right. And so he gave them this song, and then he asked everyone to translate it in their own way. And actually, he shared an article with me, and it mentioned the song. And then I looked up the song, and then I
Yeah,
heard the song, and I wept.
yeah.
Um, it is that powerful. So definitely, I will share it with you all. All right, next question. Um, is from Anna Verma. She's saying it would be great if you could talk more about the relationship that seeing and space have with writing.
Seeing in space with writing. I would probably want to extend that to thinking about all kinds of sensory approaches to space. I mean, seeing is our dominant sense, but over a certain period of time, we also discussed this a little at the writing retreat in Satkhol. Uh, at least from the Renaissance, we've privileged seeing and reason to the degree where we don't depend or trust our other senses as much. So, for creativity in particular, I think it's about extending yourself and seeing how you translate space through all kinds of other factors as well, the other senses, through smell, through touch, flavor, what's coming your way, to the larger sensorium. So one of the exercises I usually have in gatherings to do with creativity is, you pretend you're blindfolded, or you blindfold yourself, or somehow just see what the world means, what it sounds like, looks like, feels like, in other ways. And I think that actually helps us enrich our sense of being in the world and of then bearing witness to it. But when you see also, you're seeing and then you're putting down what you see. But I think it's a good idea to try and reconstruct your whole linguistic machine. Look in detail, try and bear witness in detail, think of what, I mean, is that just a blue, or is it a very particular kind of blue? Is it cerulean? Is it teal? Is it cobalt, Prussian? What is it exactly?
Great.
So I
Thank
think a
you.
certain deep attentiveness of the
Right.
senses is crucial.
Right. There's a question where Sanaya has asked, have you ever been in a situation where you really wanted to write, but you can't finish anything you started? If yes, then what do you do?
I have to quote my dear friend Indira Chandrasekhar, who lives in Bangalore, who's a marvelous writer, editor. At some point during a conversation a couple of weeks ago, she said, um, it's not that I'm a slow writer, I'm a slow completer. We all cracked up and went into gales of laughter. And I said, this is something I'm going to hold on to. I'm a slow completer. So this is something that can actually happen. I mean, you might find some difficulty in bringing something around to a conclusion. And I've sometimes had that. I mean, there are poems that have remained in my notebook for literally decades. And then suddenly there's a burst of energy and everything comes right and it turns into a poem. And then you ask yourself, why did I sit on this thing for 20 years? So timing sometimes, or a certain phrase that needs a bit of tweaking. But then there are other more practical things where you need to, especially in the crucial 4 days after your deadline's passed, you need to get your act together and get on with it. For that, there's nothing but plain old athletic application of energy.
All right, great. Thank you. Vardhini has a question. Oftentimes you have a plot in mind. I have a tendency to cross-check online and junk it in case there's something even slightly similar because I don't want to sound derivative. What do you think?
Gosh, derivative. Frankly,
Everything.
everything. I mean, there's as it says, where in the Bible does it say that? Ecclesiastes or somewhere. There's nothing new under the sun. But that being said, I think the key themes, the great techniques, these are all in place and have always been in place. But it's a question of how to reinterpret the material or the techniques. I don't think you can throw something you've written out of the window just because someone else happened to do it 500 years before you. I think it's pushing yourself to the most you can do with your material, and there will always be something distinctive. If you know, I don't want to sound all mystical and say listen to your inner voice, but there's something like a map you have for yourself, and I think it's important to go with that. And again, I think the larger question here is not to see yourself as being some soloist who will discover something no one has ever discovered before. You see yourself instead as part of a larger tradition of writing, and then you situate yourself there and then see, okay, how is this not Borges, or how is this not Susan Sontag, or whoever your particular frame of reference might be. I think it's a question of mapping yourself in terms of, the individual and and the larger tradition that you belong in. It helps us, I think, to also see that we shouldn't be burdened by this phantom of originality. Distinctiveness, yes, but are you going to completely break new ground? You may, but you might break ground adjacent to ground other people have broken.
Yeah, thanks for that. Reepal has the next question. She's saying, um, I haven't written she's making an attempt at writing a haibun. She hasn't written one before, but she's explored the poetry in different forms earlier. Would you have any suggestions or advice for someone just starting out with the form?
Oh, Haibun. Haibun appears to be in a moment of high renaissance in North America right now. There just are so many people working with haiku, tanka, Haibun. So there's so much. I mean, I can send you a small bibliography, which I put together for another friend.
We have a course that is run by Rochelle. Do you know
Ah,
Rochelle?
of course, indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's immersed in that tradition.
Yes. So
Yes,
we have a
wonderful.
course that's an online course that we
Yeah,
run, Rochelle run. In fact, it's coming up in May. Dave, if you're online, maybe you can drop a link in the
yeah, that would be great.
WhatsApp group. Yeah.
Yeah.
Will do.
Right. Great. Thank you. Next is Sumit. He's asking, how different are the approaches to one, writing poetry under your own name, and two, writing poetry as a character in a novel you're writing, especially when the literature in the book is central to the plot and the character arcs?
Ah, what does this rings a big bell from something I read very recently. I'm trying to place it now, but um, think about this through the medium of or the trope of the persona, the mask. If you're writing your own poetry, then it comes from whatever your own long-term preoccupations are. But if you're writing poetry that is said to be by a character in your book, then it has to be true to that character and organic and a little distant from yourself. That's a wonderful exercise, standing outside of yourself to see what the world looks like to somebody who's different from you. That's great. I think it's wonderful. I think of Anita Desai's Mohafiz was the movie, The Custodian. What was it called? What was the novel called? About the poet and the poor academic who's trying to write an article on it. The Custodian can't be The Guardian. But you know which book I'm talking about. So there's a lot, Anita Desai has a lot of poetry that is said to be by this figure, the protagonist. So yeah, so just see it as using a persona. Persona in the old Roman theater just meant a mask, but its etymology links it to speaking through. So a mask is not just another face that you cover your face with; it's another voice.
Thank you. That's awesome, and that's a great lead for you also. I have two very interesting questions from Shraddha Vianney.
Okay.
First one is, if you could have a dinner party with three poets, dead or alive, who would you invite?
Oh wow, desert island dinner party questions. Three dead poets. I would
Dead or alive.
Or alive, or alive. Jory Graham, among those alive, for sure. I've loved her work. We've had an occasional correspondence. She's an absolutely inspiring figure. Aga Shahid Ali. I would really like to speak with Shahid again. He was an incredibly generous, kind, and infinitely gifted soul. So for sure. Who else? I think Mir. I would probably like to receive some rebukes from him on the translation, but also to get a sense of that incredible life lived in a time of collapsing empire, and how do you hold on to your art and recraft your life in times like that, which are like our own times in a way. Yeah.
And her second question is very interesting one. रहते हैं तुमसे उस्ताद नहीं हो गालिब, कहते हैं अगले जमाने में कोई मीर भी था. Who in this world is the Mir to your Ghalib in 2025?
Who's the Mir to my Ghalib? Oh my goodness. I would, who is someone I would, among those present and living, is that the question?
So I guess who in this world is the Mir to your Ghalib?
That's right.
So if you're the Ghalib, then who
generation
would be
before.
your meal? So a generation before you. अगले जमाने में?
अगले ज़माने.
तो
So
आपके
in the
आपके
past,
अगले जमाने में कौन मीर था?
there were so many that I would. I mean, I keep circling back to Shahid, but I think he really was. Also because I met him when I was very young, and he was such an inspiration. So I would have to say Aga Shahid Ali. He had so much more to do and give, and passed too early. I would definitely think of him as someone, as a kind of a pole star figure.
Next question is quite important for all the poets. When working on a full-length poetry book, do you usually have a theme in mind and then work on individual pieces, or is it that you work on individual pieces and then select those that fit a theme, and then that's how you put the book together?
Say that there are 3 or 4 different ways of thinking about this. Um, Let me quote my dear old German publisher, who's himself a major poet, Michael Kruger. He used to say to me, you keep putting your poems in the basket, and at some point the basket will be full. So I'd say, yeah, I'm putting my poems in the basket and waiting for it to be full. And that's one way of thinking about it. And then, you shuffle it all out of the basket and figure it out and see what patterns emerge. That's one way of doing it. Another way is, if it sometimes happens, if you have the grace and are blessed and all things come right, that there's a kind of a momentum that seizes you. So in a relatively short span of time, or in bursts of energy over a period, you will have poems that pivot around a single set of questions. In that case, you're lucky and you actually have a sequence of some kind. Or you set yourself a formal aim and say that you are going to work on a book length poem dedicated to some larger question or theme. So there's no recipe for this. But in all cases, including the case of the basket that gets full, it's important to listen to your own material and to figure out what the emerging patterns are and then shape that book. I don't think it's a great idea to simply put together poems as they arrive chronologically and then hope for the best. It has to be, there's a kind of a theater. You're inviting someone to read your book. And of course, we all know that when readers pick up a book, they might just open it at random and start reading something in the middle. But as the architect of the book, you need to know how you've built that book. There has to be a structure. And to sensitive readers, as to sensitive viewers, those patterns reveal themselves. I mean, each one of us is our own first reader. So it has to have cogency and significance for each one of us, what we produce.
Right. Thank you for that. Couple of questions, and then we might have to call it quits. We're very close to 6 o'clock. A lot of writers don't have the inclination or the bandwidth to create a social media following for themselves, whereas many publishing heads quote that as a prerequisite to be published. What is the reality?
I'm saddened by the idea that people should be judged on the number of people who follow them or whatever it is, because that's just, there might be writers who just want to keep to themselves or not have a social media profile. But unfortunately, it seems to have become a kind of it's a reality. So
sorry.
yeah, no, Chetan, go ahead. I
Go
mean,
ahead. I'll join in after you. Please.
Okay,
I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, not at all. For me, it was very simple. I mean, I got onto Twitter at some point. Facebook did not work for me. I didn't even try it. With Twitter, as long before it turned into X, it was still a place where you could build certain intersecting communities. So there was a group of people who were concerned with ecology and the environment, another set with poetry, another set with translation. It was very, very nourishing. So to me, it wasn't really about the numbers or anything. It was about an expansion of community and dialogue. At some point, I got interested in Instagram, partly because another mentor and friend, Hans Ulrich Obrist, the curator, said, Insta is the future. So it took me a few years to realize it was the future, by which time it was the present. But then I thought, okay, let's look at this thing. And I thought, I'm going to use this as a literary medium. So, I mean, and if I do post a picture of one of my, well, now passed into the ages cats, it's hopefully to say something larger than just the cat. So in a way, it's, for me, Instagram is a literary medium and I treat it like that. So it's allowed me to speak in a memoiristic vein, which I usually don't. Aspects of family history, stories, anecdotes, stuff that I normally run away from. Usually say I'm terrible at telling stories, but Instagram somehow allows you. There's a warmth to the medium. So I would say think about the literary value and usefulness to you of that medium, and not just because someone says, if you don't have 3,000 or 30,000 followers, we're not going to take you seriously. And it's a terrible criterion to judge literary merit. You can get a great number of followers by doing quite trivial things.
Yeah, that's true.
Sorry, Chetan, you were going to say.
So I was just going to add that we had this conversation in a private Zoom session with Mansi. Mansi is the publisher at
Subramanian.
Penguin, and she said a very interesting thing. She said that we don't really look at your social media imprint and footprint if you're a literary writer.
Yes.
We only look at it if you're a genre writer, which means if you're writing, because genre writer readers tend to follow and have that whole thing going on. So that was an interesting distinction which I'd never thought of earlier. But now that you think about it, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
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 Right.
It's good to have all this information at hand as you launch out into your practice. Yeah.
Nupur has an interesting question. Has it come to a point where writing in Urdu itself has become a political act in the country? What would you say?
Well, thankfully, there was a Supreme Court ruling last week or in the last 10 days that struck down some frivolous plea that you shouldn't have Urdu on signboards. And the Supreme Court ruled that Urdu is certainly an Indian language. It's tragic that we now have to argue this. And for instance, Persian is an Indian language. I mean, I talk about that in the introduction to Mir Takimir. I mean, in the 18th and 19th century, there was far more writing and publishing in Persian in India than in Iran, because Qajar Iran was caught up with notions of Arabic as a prestige language. To us, Persian was a prestige language and a common language. So it's tragic when languages get politicized like this, because it's part of a larger story where you're trying to marginalize, stigmatize, and then annihilate a whole group of people, a community, an ethnicity, a religious community. It's tragic that we've come to that kind of moment in our history, having begun as a pluralist republic that was going to be inclusive. But yeah, I think it is important, which is why, when I think about friends and colleagues like Rahman Abbas, for instance, who's an Urdu novelist, when I look at the work Rakshanda Jalil is doing in terms of translations, or Rana Safvi, these are marvelous things. But I think the great sadness for me in terms of the understanding of Urdu literary history is that it never has been linked to a single religious community. When you look at it, you find that there are people from all forms of caste, ethnicity, religion who wrote in Urdu. And it's that inclusiveness of the language and its history that we need to retrieve and reclaim. So that will call for courage, yes.
All right, great. Makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you so much, Ranjit. It's 6 o'clock and I'm gonna let you go now. Thanks for making the time. Thanks for this wonderful conversation.
Not at all. Thank you. Thanks so much, Chetan, and thank you to everybody who was here and for all these questions. It's really been wonderful. Yeah, super.
Great.
Great.